Hello everyone, welcome back to Agent of Nagash, channel dedicated to Sigmar, and in this video it's going to be my why play Legions of Nagash. So inevitably it's going to be one of my first why play videos because, you know, Nagash is this Age of Nagash and Death is my homely army, so I like to call it. And I know it's been split down into several different armies now, mainly like full-fledged armies. So you know, you've got Legions of Nagash, Flesh-Eater Courts, Nighthorn and Osterite Bone Reapers, but Legions of Nagash is the core of my Death army. I must have at least probably about 8,000 points, if not more, of Legions of Nagash. So it's definitely one of my favourite armies, aesthetically and gameplay reasons. And that is why I want to do a video on them, to help encourage people to play the army, or if you've even bought some of the models, just to give you a bit more motivation for you to build, paint and play those games we've all been waiting for. Okay, so what I'm going to do in this video, it's going to be similar to the Slate of Darkness one. I'm going to highlight some strengths and weaknesses. Of course, this is my own personal thoughts. I'm not right about everything and we may have some disagreements. If we do, please let me know in the chat, as I believe that we can all learn from each other. So firstly, why play Legions of Nagash? So a strength I would say is Nagash is simply the best. There's no denying it. Nagash is the one true god in Age of Sigmar, and if not in the whole Warhammer universe. Nagash is all, and all is one in Nagash, of course. So, with that, I think also he's got a great character to him. He's absolutely fantastic, and really, you guys can stop listening now because that's the main reason to do the army. If you need another reason to do the army, I suppose you have to continue. So, the first thing with any army I talk about, of course, you've got the rules, and we'll go into that later, and you know, strategies behind the armies, tactics, etc. But for me personally, and most people out there, the main reason I would do an army is due to the models themselves. It doesn't matter if it's the best army on the table. If the models are not to my liking, I will not do it. And I know a lot of you people are the same. And if you're not the same and you just like to game with models that, you know, are best on the table, then that's fair enough. But for me personally, the models have to look good. So what are Legions of Nagash models like? So they essentially are your traditional undead models. You know, you've got your zombies, skeletons, vampires, that sort of thing. Even ghosts in the form of Nighthorn, some of them can be put into your Legions of Nagash army. So to summarise it, is essentially the typical gothic looking undead that we all sort of know and love, or fear even. And we've got, you know, ranks upon ranks of Death Rattle, which are, you know, your skeleton legions, which for me, a traditional sort of, as I like to call, vampire count army with all the ranks upon ranks of skeletons, with vampire lords as the leaders, with necromancers, is one of the most aesthetically pleasing armies I can see on the table. Doesn't mean it's the best army out there. No, it's not the best army out there, but it can be quite good. And it, for me, aesthetically is great. I love a load of the old, like, you know, vampire counts or Legions of Nagash models that were around. Like I managed to find a old vampire lord on Zombie Dragon, or not a vampire lord on Zombie Dragon, but the necromancer hero named character on a old Mess of Zombie Dragon, which I absolutely love that model, so I'm really happy with. And essentially that, so if you are quite new as well to Age of Sigmar, it is basically your vampire counts in a nutshell that have been put into a main army. I mean, of course you can say no, because, you know, the Strigoi, you know, the abhorrent Ghoul Kings essentially, and the Crypt Ghouls and Cryptoids are in their own army, which is true, but you see what I'm coming from. So that's that with the models. They also have some, you know, fantastic, great characters with that. You've got Nagash, the big man himself, of course. You've got his main Mortarchs, and I say main Mortarchs, these are the ones that have been around for a long time. And this is going to be, you know, your Manfred von Carstein, your Mortarch of Night. You, of course, then had the Blood Queen herself, Neferata, the Mortarch of Blood. And then you've got, obviously, Nagash's right-hand man, of course, being Arkan the Black, the Mortarch of Sacrament. So those are your three main Mortarchs, and I know there are different ones now. You've got ones for the Nighthorn and the Bone Reapers, but, you know, they're the three traditional ones. With talking about, you know, the great characters, what Legions of Nagash has, and sort of what I've already mentioned with the sort of typical undead feel of the army in terms of models, you have a huge model range for Legions of Nagash. It is essentially basically all the death units from that have been around for a long time, all in that army. And I don't mean they're all old, but some of them are a bit older than others. And you do have things like, obviously, Bone Reapers have popped up now, and before that was Nighthorn, and Flesh-Eater Courts kind of got new units, not new models, but new units, which expanded upon their army. But before that, Legions of Nagash was your only way to take death. You could take him in, you know, Nighthaunt. You could take him in Flesh Eater Corpse as well, but not really to the same effectiveness. So Legions of Nagash really did tie up death together, which is great. And that's why I mean there's a huge range of models. There's a huge variety of units you could have in your army, and that sort of just goes into the next thing I want to say, that there are lots of ways to build a army, and in terms of army list as well. So you can go horde with, you know, like literally to some point like hundreds of skeletons, or, you know, usually around 100 sort of skeletons, Graveguard, that sort of thing. Graveguard are really cool. Things like Black Knights, which I love Black Knights. I really want them to work when I use them, but for some reason, despite their odds of how much damage they can do, they always disappoint me and fail. But I think that's mainly the gods sort of cursing me rather than Black Knights being really, really bad. So, but you can have, like, you know, that sort of skeleton feel of the army. You can also go like hordes with obviously zombies and all that sort of thing. You go chain wrath, so you have, you know, your ghost with your field saves or your standard horde in that army if you wanted to. But then you've got the other side. So I have ran this army as a horde with all the skeletons. However, I lack a lot of movement trays. So for me, moving that many models across the board, it's not fun. Nothing wrong with doing that, and it's not a non-fun way to play the game, if you see what I mean. Just get some movement trays. It'll just be easy. I was literally just lazy and not buying movement trays, but I bought a few, and it encourages me to take a big block of skeletons. So in all honesty, get movement trays if you want to go that way. So with that, like I say, I have used them as a horde, but I have also used them as elite, and I do tend to go the elite route because to be honest, that's for most armies. I just like moving fewer models across the board. I find that you're spending less time moving the models across the board and more time enjoying the games that you're playing, and I just like things in my army just having more than damage 1, or, you know, having rend or something like that. And that's why when I generally go to tournaments with Legions of Nagash, I was running. This was a little while ago, so this was before Bone Reapers came out, so it has changed things a bit. But I'd be running something like Nagash, a Vampire Lord, a unit of 6 Morghast Archai, and then about 20 Direwolves and a Spell Portal. And then that would kind of be the list from top of my head, from what I can remember. And you could say that, yeah, that list massively lacked numbers, so it's quite hard for it to win on the objectives. However, I have an absolute ball of a time, Nagash being an absolute wrecking ball. Then my Morghast Harbingers will absolutely destroy the enemy, and the Direwolves will do what they can for the objectives. And that sort of list, I would say, I wouldn't take to a tournament, especially a big tournament like Warhammer World or something, mainly because if you want to play really competitively, just because I love that. And people said, you can't have, a big block of 6, Morghast, it just doesn't work. It did work. Make them charge 3d6. They always got to attack with all the weapons. I think there was one case where they didn't. Unfortunately, they managed to attack with all the weapons against a unit of Wrathmongers when they used to have the old rule. And oh my god, it's horrendous, the Aftermath. Anyway, but the reason why I wouldn't take something like that now is because there are so many ways in the game of Age of Sigmar. Practically every army, most armies out there, have a way to massively debuff the enemy. Legions of Nagash have it massively. That's one thing they do have in their spells. You've got IDNF Deep can make things minuses to hit. You've got things like Slanesh can make it hard for you to, can nerf your fighting by essentially just making your fight last. You've got loads of different ways out there to nerf the enemy. Bone Reapers have got it. And the problem with that is it means that when you only take 1 or 2 killer units in your army, and admittedly they're like, what we call a Death Star unit, Nagash with his, 3-up save, rerolling 1 in Legions of the Nagash army. Then you've got, a unit of 6 Morghast Archai, which is just going to melt anything they come across, essentially. When the enemy just stacks all the debuffs onto one of those units, like I had it when I had a unit of 6 Morghast Harbingers debuffed by the enemy. They were literally minus they subtract 2 from their attacks, and they were also subtracting 2 from their hit rolls, and the other things only charge 1d6. I believe that's what it was, or it might be 2d6. But anyway, it made their charging a lot harder. So what essentially that meant is that big point invested unit, which back then when I was running it did cost me 660 points. It's different now, but it did cost me 660 points. Was just not doing anything that game. And then the Gash had to do all the work, and that just meant I only had 1 unit that could go around killing things, because the Direwolves are just there for objectives and screening. So in that case, it just didn't work, and unfortunately, the way the game's gone now, and I say unfortunately, it does help balance the game. means that that's not so viable anymore. And when I say viable, I just mean if you want to win, like more than 3 games, which is, to be honest, if I go to a tournament and I win 3 games, I'm more than happy. So for me, I would still take it to a tournament, but it's just if you want to go really competitive, maybe look more towards not a complete horde. If you want to do that, that's fine. But, just more than 1 or 2, really strong units in your army. I mean, like if you take Nagash and you think I'm going to make him unkillable, which different army, but Bone Reapers, you can make Nagash like just so hard to kill, but you have to sink so many points into that, and the enemy could just nerf him, and then it defeats the whole object. So just something to bear in mind. Don't invest all your points into one model, and then we'll talk about a bit more about that when we go down to the weaknesses. But like I said, there are lots of different ways you can take this army, and with the range of models, I mean, for example, I'll be honest, there'll be like one thing like a model I don't really often take, which are Vargeis in the army, because I've got loads of crit flares, but I haven't really used them as Vargeis. And like I say, I'll be honest, they're not the best unit in the army, but they're not bad, and they have came down a point. So that's something I'll be interested in trying out, and that's something that I've never really focused on in the army, and I've been playing the army ever since it came out. And like I say, I've mainly been focused on elite style, and now because I've played that sort of to death, if you pardon the pun a little bit, I maybe turn a little bit more towards the horde side of my Legions of Nagash. There's lots of different ways you can run them, which is really, really cool. And it also encourages you to take named characters into your army, like Arkan, Manfred, Neferata, and Nagash. It does sort of encourage you to take those models in the game. Are they the best models? Rules-wise, probably not, I'd say so, because they're so... With the Mortarks, anyway, they're so closely pointed to a Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon, and you give the Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon a Field Amulet and everything else. And bear in mind, the Mortarks only have, a 4-up save with 11 wounds. Are they the best thing to take? I generally think the Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon is. But if you go for each Legion, sort of can encourage you to take those models, which is cool because named characters aren't often seen on the table, and sometimes they have got good purposes for them, certainly. Okay, so like I say, there's lots of different ways to build the army. The other thing to say about the army of Legions of Nagash is, to be honest, it's a solid army. It's durable because of things like Gravesight and Deathly Invocation, so your heroes can bring back your Sunball units. There's way for units that aren't Sunball to heal wounds. You can make Nagash a very effective guy for healing wounds as well. It's a very durable army for an army that you look up and you see like skeletons either have essentially a 5-up save or no save. It's more durable than you think, and it's not the army itself having great standard saves on their war scrolls. You're going to struggle to see a 3-up save in there, Bar Nagash, and the Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon. There is not that much that has that. However, the army is durable in the terms of its regeneration, which is absolutely fantastic in my honest opinion if you play it right. If you don't play it right, the enemy can outmaneuver you. They could do things like kill your heroes with shooting. They can stand on your Gravesight, so it's even harder for you to be in range to bring back those models. The other thing to say about the army is if you have got Nagash, your rerun save rolls are 1, which is great for his command ability. The other thing to say about the army, so we said, it's a durable army, which is... In this game, it's all about objectives, so you can hold the objective longer than the enemy. It's fantastic, and obviously compared to when Legion of Nagash first came out, things have changed. Like I say, skeletons are quite durable with their summoning mechanic and everything else. Well, when I say summoning, the resurrection essentially. But now you've got things like Mortek Guard, which have a 3-up save re-rolling, and there's ways to bring them back pretty easily. I'm not going to lie, I can't really compare normal skeletons to that, because that is just stupid durable. You've also got things like your Chain Rasps are very durable with, I believe, a 5-up save, and obviously they've got Ethereal, so they won't take any rend, and they have got the summoning keyword, so they can come back, which is really, really great. It's also one of the best armies at Magic, and Nagash being potentially the best spellcaster in the game. And the lore for Legions of Nagash, magic-wise, is solid. You've got the lore of vampires and the lore of death mages, I believe it is, or the lore of death. Essentially, you've got one for the necromancers and one for the vampires, and then the Mortarks can choose whichever one they want, what lore they want to pick from, and then Nagash can pick, 3 from whatever lore he wants. And that's not 3 in each lore, that's just he has 3 spells in total, and he can choose what he wants. And the lore of I believe it is the lore of the death mages. Apologies, I haven't Can't remember off the top of my head. So Law of the Death Mage, I believe it is called. And what that means is that law is very, very, very focused on purely debuffing the enemy, which I think is a massive, great way to have a spell law. Of course, it's, you know, great when you see a spell law and it's like, you know, +1 to your attacks or something like that, which is really, really good. But to debuff the enemy by simply making the enemy go like, yeah, well, Spectral Grass, anything within, I believe, 3 inches of this terrain piece is like going to be half its movement for the enemy. You know, rounding down. So they've got a 5-inch movement, now 2-inch movement. That is huge, especially how, like we say, it's an objective game, and how you get to the objectives a lot of the time, it's not about how much you can kill or how much damage you can take. It's a case of speed and movement in those last final rounds. So being able to do that to the enemy is absolutely huge. And then you've got things like debuffing the enemy, making them minuses to hit, making them minuses to their attack characteristic, make it harder for them to charge. That sort of stuff. There are ways for you to heal within those laws, and then with the vampire side, again, there's ways for you to heal, but there are ways for you to gain movement for like the caster. There are also ways to deal damage to your enemy. There's one called, I believe, the Amplify Maul, which is a great way, a bit risky, but a great way to do mortal wounds to your enemy, and a lot of them. So the spells within the Legions of Nagash have got a lot of utility to them. You can sort of pick and choose. And if you know what army you're going to be going up against, if it's just your local store and go, oh, my mate's got a Deep King army, what spells have I got? You know, you can just pick and choose for which army. It's quite good for that. So yeah, that's why I like. That's why I think it's solid. You've also got things like it's one of the best armies for summoning because it's got such a good summoning mechanic. Is it like some of the broken, sort of, shall we say, summoning mechanics now? Which I think Depravity Points is still a bit too good, and apparently there's things about pink horrors everyone's going on about, which are quite good, but it's a different type of summoning. But the Legions of Nagash did have a summoning what made a lot of people whine about for quite a while, which was basically bringing back a destroyed unit through a gravesite, and you just bring back Greengrass Reapers, because Greengrass Reapers were a very, very good choice to use for that, because it's a summonable unit. It has to be a summonable unit that's died, and you just literally spend a command points to it. There's a bit more details than that, but you can read about that in the Legions of Nagash Battlezone. But it's got a great summoning mechanic and not too hard for you to get it off. Essentially, keep one of your grey sites in your backfield, because this destroyed unit you're bringing back, the destroyed summoning unit you're bringing back, has to set up wholly within 9 inches of the objective and 9 inches away from the enemy. So what the enemy can do is put one model in the middle of the grave site, which is just a point on the battlefield, and then they can say, yeah, you can't summon because we're right on top of this, so you can't be 9 inches away from me and still hold within 9 inches of the grave site. But you get 4 grave sites, so what you can do is you can put, you know, the one in your backfield, you know, so it's always going to be safe from the enemy generally, unless the enemy deep strikes. But if the enemy is deep striking that way, then you've probably got more problems to worry about. Okay, so that's on one side, speaking for a long time there. Another great reason I love this army and I think it's solid is because I believe they have the best battle line in the game for screening purposes, for bubble wrap purposes. Have done a video on that, and I'm going to try and do like a little Pachow moment so it goes in the top right corner, that sort of thing. Hopefully you can click on it. And that is Direwolves. They are, for me, the best battle line in the game for their screening purposes. So they cost you 70 points, used to cost you 60, but 70 points. They have 2 wounds apiece. They come minimum size units of 5, so that is 10 wounds. They have a 5 up save, and they have 2 attacks each, which are 4s and 4s, no rend 1 damage on the charge. They get +1 to wound. Furthermore, they are summonable, so when they are destroyed, you can bring them back. You can resurrect models to that unit as well, and like I say, they're battle lines, so they're taking up a slot there. Especially they're great for me because I wanted to go elite with my, you know, Morghast and all that sort of thing. I didn't have to worry too much about having the free battle lines. Direwolves filled it really nicely, very cheap. But beyond anything else, the best thing about Direwolves is, like I say, their speed to be able to get to objectives, and their speed also comes in importantly for the point of being screened. So I use them as screens for my Morghast and my Nagash, because Nagash and the Morghast move quite fast and needed something to be quite fast with them. They could provide a screen in front of those models, being the Morghast and Nagash. And Morghast and Nagash can fly, so they could fly over the models when they made the charge, fly over the Direwolves, but the enemy can always do the same against the Morghast or Nagash unless they were flying. Or even if they were flying, I'd have like a unit of 10 Direwolves, which would massively string out. And like I say, that is their greatest point to the Direwolves, is the size of their base. They are the size of a standard cavalry base, so I can't remember the top of my mind what size it is, but you know, your Black Knight base, your your Pistolier size base, you know, that standard cavalry size base, even Moser Guard on it, which I don't understand because it's absolutely ridiculous. Or, you know, Death Riders more commonly nowadays. You know, when I say more commonly, I mean newer models. So they are on quite large bases. So if you had, you know, 5 of those, it would screen the front of 4 Morghast, Harmongers, Archai. It would screen the Gash from one direction. If you had 10, it really strings out an area. Even just having 10, if you don't need to use them as a screen, just on your back field, just in a straight line, preventing the enemy to be able to deep strike behind you. It's just so powerful, and that costs you 140 points. And then you don't have to worry about the enemy deep striking from behind you. If you had 15 in a unit, that would go from one end of the board to the other, give or take a few inches. That is how solid they are on their bases. And I know it sounds like a weird thing to just like talk about. The best thing about this unit is the size of its base, and for some people they might not see the base size coming too much into the game. However, the base size matters hugely, especially on a screening unit. I really can't recommend them enough, and they are my favourite battle line for that reason. Okay, and then to talk about the tactics behind the Legions of Nagash, really. So there are obviously things the army are good at, and that is going to be things like you're going to want to have multiple heroes to be able to bring back models. Your army does have some capability of having very heavy hitting heroes, which are predominantly going to be your Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, and then there's a bit of a step down from that to like your standard Vampire Lords and everything else. The army is very supportive. There are some units in the army that, like I say, can just wander off on their own and do wherever they need to do. They don't really need any support from heroes or magic, but most units in this army does. So you're going to want to have necromancers. You're going to want to have a Vampire Lord maybe to get those extra attacks. There are ways in the Grand Host of Nagash, which is one of the legions within the Legion of Nagash, to get multiple attacks to your your Death Rattle, your Skeletons, your Grave Guard, to give them, you know, your Black Knights and stuff as well, of course, to give them additional, you know, death save, ward save, whatever you want to call it. But to be able to do that, you have to have things within range of each other, and that is a very key thing. Heroes are very important in this army, particularly if you want to go a horde sort of side of things. The Deathly Invocation of bringing back slain summonable units is it's a massive part of that. You do need to take quite a few heroes. Are heroes as important as a Sinesh army for, you know, like, for example, in Sinesh they need it for the Pravity? I would say not, but heroes are very important in this army. For example, like I say, the tournament army I was running with 6 Morghast Harbingers, Nagash, Direwolves and a Vampire Lord, yet there was only 2 heroes in the army. However, that is how I could run the army, and it worked efficiently because Nagash's command ability was good enough synergy, because I didn't really have any summonable units bar my Direwolves, and I weren't really worried too much about bringing them back all the time. So, but in most other cases you do want to have your support, and a lot of the heroes in the army do have a purpose. There are some things that don't, like I think the White King, since they got rid of its banner, I honestly don't see the point of it anymore. In my honest opinion, you might as well get a Vampire Lord, unless you're really down on points and you just want him for the extra attacks that he can stack on a unit. Well, not stack, just put on a unit. That's, for me, he isn't really worth it. There are some things that some people don't like, the Bloodseeker Panicant and all that sort of thing. I personally haven't tried it, so I can't really say. But there are some heroes that are better than others, but there are ways for you to take most of the heroes in this army without it being negatively bad for you. Something about the army as well is because, you know, it lacks shooting. It wants to get to the objectives as quick as possible, or get to the enemy as quick as possible. It is a melee offensive army. It's not a range offensive army. Yeah, you can chuck some magic at the enemy, but it is going to be doing its damage in combat. It does have more than enough different units to be able to do the damage to the enemy in combat, but it is very important to know that. Otherwise, the enemy's just going to shoot you to pieces if you're going against that sort of army. You could, like, you know, send in a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon with a Fear Amulet straight at the enemy, and, you know, turn 1. There are ways for you to do that. I've had that done to me. Every time that's been done to me against my Legions of Nagash, I've killed it. So I have no idea why you would deep strike that in by itself, unless the enemy's made a massive like opener for you to squeeze it in and kill something very important. But if you lose that Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon, you've lost something important as well. So I personally see the point behind that. So yeah, the tactics of the army is mass heroes. You can go elite, you can go horde, which I've explained a lot already. And then depending on that, it's going to be which way you take the rest of your sort of the structure of your list, really. And it's a fast army. It relies a lot on spells to debuff your enemy. You don't have to focus on that too much, but I feel like you'll be missing out a little bit. You want to have at least one caster in this army. Don't take this army without a caster unless you've got a really specific build in mind. You definitely want to have one caster. A Vampire Lord on foot or horse or winged is better in my opinion than a Necromancer, unless you're taking a big Sunball unit, and the Necromancer can do Van Hels's Dance Macabre. And if you're taking other ways for you to get spells from Death Mages, because you do want those spells, things like Overwhelming Dread, Spectral Grasp, stuff like that, and you really do want to get. I think Fading Vigor is another one, where you can make the enemy have -1 attack and only roll 1d6 on charge, I think, something along those lines. And that's only from Lord of the Death Mages. So there are good points to each heroes in the army, and that's what I was sort of making earlier with that idea. So yeah, tactics wise, it's an army that relies a lot on its heroes to support it. If you look at a lot of the units in the army, some of it may seem quite weak in comparison compared to some of the other armies out there on their war scrolls, but that is because they rely on being buffed up by your heroes and their command abilities. Most certainly, don't be scared to get into combat with this army. It's a trial and error army. Is it the easiest army to on the get-go to play? I'm a brand new player to Age of Sigmar. I want to do this in my army. Is it the hardest? No, this is my first army in Age of Sigmar, and I managed to learn the ropes. It did take me a little bit while, but I think that might have been because it took a bit of time to get through my fixed skull than anything else. However, it did the job, and it's like anything, it's just practice. And then this is an army that I say it's easy to learn to a certain point, but it can be very hard to master. This army can go 5 games at a tournament. It's increasingly harder for it to do it now because you've obviously got more powerful armies coming about, but you know, it can still give those armies a bloody nose if it needs to. So yeah, that's my sort of overall thoughts of the strengths of the army. But inevitably, there are some weaknesses, and we are going to have to talk about that. I can't be completely biased, but I will try to be as biased as I can towards this army, so don't you worry about that. If you do want to start this army, I will try and help you out and minimal the weaknesses as much as possible. So the first one I want to say is it's not invincible. I've made a few good points about this army, so it's a solid army, but there are some weaknesses that it has in terms of on the table. Some armies it's not going to be great against. Like in my personal experience, I fought Slanesh with this army. I didn't do very well, might have been my generalship. However, I didn't really have any shooting to inflict damage upon the keepers of secrets from a distance, so they got to me in combat, and that sort of just comes into the point that this army doesn't really have any way to make the enemy attack last unless you go double gang a cloak off the top of my head. There's not many ways to do it with this army, so there's that. Nagash is too expensive in points. It's not even like, is he too expensive in this army? He's too expensive. He no longer knows all the spells of Death Wizards, and yes, he can spam Arcane Bolt, which is good, but it's not anywhere nearly as good as knowing the spells to Death Wizards, because then what Nagash could pretty much do is know most of the spells, the important spells from the lore of vampires and Death Mages in the Legions of Nagash, because what you do is you have your other wizards take those spells from those lores and then just have Nagash cast those spells because he's casting it with +3 to cast. And that's how it works. But now you can't do that. Interesting point though, in Bone Reapers, Nagash and Arcan know all the spells of the the lore from the Bone Reapers book. They know how to pick a spell, they just know all of them. So maybe we'll see that happen with the Legions and Nagash lore spells. I really hope so. If they do that, then it makes him more viable. But also Nagash has gone up in points. He's basically gone up in points because if you take in Bone Reaper's Petrified Elite, he now has a 2-up save rerolling ones. But that's what really annoys me. So he's more he's 880 points at the top of my head from what he is, because he can have a 2-up save rerolling 1. But not in Legions of Nagash army. That's just in one Legion within the Bone Reapers. That Games Workshop, in my honest opinion, is a bit of a stupid game design coming out of that Legion. I mean, yes, I'm working on Bone Reaper's army and I plan to go to a tournament, and yes, I plan on taking that Legion Petra Elite, so I'm sounding like a hypocrite. However, I'm taking that Legion because how they designed that book, it obviously says, right, there are these other Legions, well, cool, but you want to take this one. You'll be missing out if you don't take this Legion. That to me is how it is done. So unfortunately, because you can make Nagash have a 2+ save rerollable one, he has to be 880 points apparently. Even that he can't be like that in his own bloody allegiance. And that's what annoys me, because I love Nagash. I've got a Nagash model. I have a picture somewhere throughout this video that you can see, and I put it on my community post. lately, and I love that model so much. You know, obviously I'm Age of Nagash, aren't I? My whole channel was built around the guy's name, and it's just sad that I don't take him to the table anymore. I tried it. You invest so many points into him, then like I said, the enemy just nerfs him to death, which, you know, is fair enough because he's a big boy, and he can do quite a few things. And then, like, when I say the enemy nerfs him, I mean basically I had a game against Slaves of Darkness and they had better core and they made Nagash only do things on a 5-up. Nagash rolled 11 dice to be able to try and do things, and he only got 1 5-up, and that was to move 2 inches. So I'm very salty from that, essentially. But he's just too expensive in points. He's only one model. And he's 880 points. He's effectively half your army. So that is what annoys me about Nagash. But, you know, he's not going to go up in points. If he does, then that's just completely stupid. So, you know, he will come down at some point, which will be good. Or he'll just get a bit better. So he's not in his best point at the moment, but he can't get any worse unless it's just a really stupid thing. Okay, so with Nagash to the side, the army has no real shooting. Yes, your zombie dragon's going to have a shooting attack. Yes, your Terrorgeist is going to have a scream attack. And yes, your Nagash is going to have the Gaze Nagash, where I think is one of the best shooting attacks. It just stares at someone and they just die, which is great. Or stares at like a small monster and it dies because T6 damage. And you're going to have your Tomb Banshee. I'm not going to go through all of them in case there's like another obscured one that I can't think of the top of my head. Essentially, it doesn't really have any shooting in the army. It doesn't have any. I think the best way to describe it, doesn't have any long-range reliable shooting, and that means that yes, the Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon with its shooting attack is very good, you know, with the -3 rend, or you go with the Prince Vahordre with the Mortal Wounded. Yes, that's very good, but very short range. So you don't have any long-range shooting to try and get those enemy characters that are just hiding at the back line. There are ways for you to deep strike against the enemy and sort of ambush against them, which is good, and a way to counter that, but you don't have any real shooting. So if you like shooting armies, this is not for you. Doesn't have the newest models either. Not the oldest models, but some of the kits are pretty old in the terms of zombies. One day maybe they'll make decent zombies, because zombies could be such a cool looking model. So, I mean, I've got a box of zombies I use for like decapitated, you know, like corpses and all that sort of thing for my, you know, basing and all that. And even for scenery, those zombie models are pretty bad. Even for dead bodies on scenery, they're not very good for just being corpses. Which goes to show, even when they're covered in blood for the Blood God, you know, it goes to show that they really do need a new kit, in my honest opinion. And then there's some other older models, and even some models are just going to be, you know, there's be quite a few mold lines, essentially. You know, with your skeletons, they can be quite fiddly to build, but not impossible. But you know, they break quite easily. The plus side to that is if a skeleton arm falls off during a battle, it looks fine. You know, no other army can really get away with it, but they can, which you know is good. And but yeah, they don't have the newest models. They have some awesomely cool models, and like I say, I like classic models as well, but they don't have the newest ones. But, you know, that's the same for a lot of armies out there that aren't, you know, brand new Age of Sigmar armies. They don't have the newest models. So, but I just wanted to mention that. Are they really hard to build? No. Are Spirit Hosts really hard to build? Yes. Are Morghast really hard to build? Not as hard as people make out. Okay, so, and like I say, they don't really have a attack first mechanic off the top of my head, unless so you go like the double gang cloak, which is incredibly important because almost this game has turned into, if your army can't attack first or doesn't have a mechanic to do so, or it doesn't have a mechanic that can let you withstand the enemy attacking you first, it's not a top tier army. And that is a thing. You know, that's how I look at things. You know, we've got things like Sinesh or Deep King, or, you know, like Khorne can do it, or there's so many other ways to attack the enemy outside of sequence and some of the other armies. It just makes it hard to combat, but not every army needs to be, you know, winning every tournament. And if you're playing an army that just wins all the tournaments, for me, they're not the sort of armies I go for. Yes, I'm playing Bone Reapers and they are very good, but that's because I absolutely love the models, and that's the reason. Yeah, they are very powerful, and it's the first sort of army I'm doing that is a powerful army, but for me, I always go for the models first. And then just something else I want to say about the Legions of Nagash is I'm not a fan of really any of their battalions. Yes, the Legion Sacrament one isn't bad, but the rest of them are just diabolic as shit. You've got the Death March, I believe it's called, which is all about Death Rattle and a White King, which used to be alright and used to be playable. No, now it's just like, just why? They made it worse, and it's which is a load of crap in my honest opinion. You've got the Nagash Legion, which is just a way for Nagash to even be harder to die, but like I said, there's no point investing too many points into that model already. But he can like just help you bring back more skeletons and stuff with his Death Invocation, but still, it's not. It doesn't really matter. There's so many ways to heal up skeletal units that you don't need it. If a skeletal unit's taking that much of a hit, or some unit I should say is taking that much of a hit that you do need everything you can do just to heal as much back, you're probably a bit screwed anyway. So that's that. You've got Neferata's Battalion, which is you just read it and just go, what even is the point of this? You've got the Blood Dragon Battalion, which is just like, I can't afford all the Blood Dragons. And don't get me wrong, like Blood Dragon Vampires, Blood Knights, are absolutely awesome. If you can afford to get them and everything, I think they're great models. They are resin and they are a pain to build apparently, and I've spoken to someone who owns 30 of them, so take that, bearing in mind that not all the Lancers are going to be straight when you get them, and you're going to be paying a ridiculous amount of money for not great quality models, but they do look awesome. So if you can afford to, that's fine. But, that battalion is pretty crap. I think it's like the Bloodkeep or something. And then, Manfred's one is not great either, in my honest opinion. And then, like I say, the Legion of Sacrament one, Arcane's one, is the best one out of the lot of them. It's not as good as it used to be. They're not the worst battalions in the game, but I've never taken any of them. But apart from the Death March, when it used to be better, I think I might have taken one of them once, maybe. But obviously, from my memory, it doesn't show that I've had a good experiences with them. But some other armies have bad battalions as well, like INF Deepkin. I don't think their battalions are great. And that's where some battalions goes these days. They're just, some books have great battalions, some books have not even worth considering, which is a shame, because back in the day, I loved battalions, because it was a case of, that's how I'm going to build my army to fit that battalion. But now, in most cases, it's not the case, which is unfortunate. But those are my weaknesses. So obviously you can tell by how long I talked about the weaknesses compared to the strengths that I think this army is it's a great army. It's a great looking army as well. When you get the ranks upon ranks of models, or just the deathly creatures and monsters on the table, you can't beat it. I've got massive nostalgia love for this army as well. I'm massively biased towards this army. Like I say, Nagash is the best, even though he's really pointed costed. He is an awesome model, and it's just a fantastic army. I've got a huge love for this army. I did say that, Flesh Eater Courts is sort of my baby army. It is the army I do love the most, but it did all stem from, vampire counts and stuff, and that is what Legions of Nagash do remind me of. And with that, I can say the joys I've had with this army, and if you're thinking about doing this army because you like the models as well, you like the gameplay, you like the durability and the resilience, and just the idea of just undead, relentless legions just smashing against the enemy. And yes, you could say it's like water and rock a little bit, but eventually those rocks do get worn down. It's just, death is endless, death is inevitable, and it comes for all. And for me, that sort of theme towards the army is what I love. That regimental prowess of cold steel marching inevitably towards the enemy in mass ranks, led by a Vampire Lord, is great, and that is why I love this army. And if you feel the same, then 100% do it. I think I've talked enough in a broad way what I can about this army. I have done more videos about this army. You're more than welcome to check out on my playlists. Some of those videos are more out of date than others, but they are all essentially talking about Legions of Nagash. And yeah, and if you're still wondering who Nagash is, essentially, like I say, the best character in the whole universe. And he is the Lord of all things undeath. He used to be immortal and he essentially made himself a god. He ascended himself, which is absolutely fantastic in my opinion. And like I say, the army, if you're thinking about doing it, just do it. You won't regret it. Okay guys, so thank you very much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, please like, subscribe and comment down below. If you've got any other questions or something I didn't talk about in this video or cover, let me know in the comments. I'll be happy to answer and give you as much advice as I can, because this is the army I know the most about. I know I've been quite broad talking about this army, but that's what these wide play videos are. They're not me talking about detailed lists of why this list is winning this tournament and that, and why Grimghast Reapers are better than this other unit to go for. These videos are for me, for people who are thinking about doing an army, for me to hopefully try and tip them over the fence. And so when I say tip, I mean just massively shove them over the fence with a rugby tackle. To make them do an army they love. It's always hard to decide if you're going to do an army, because a lot of times you have to justify it, because you might already have projects, still waiting for you. But hopefully this helps you find more love in the hobby, And even if you like this, that might be a project you had. Legions of Nagash might be an army you've got sitting around all sink wrapped in boxes, and you just need a bit more motivation to crack on with them. And I hope this video has helped. So guys, like I say, I want to say a massive thank you to my patrons as well, who do a massive support job for me to be able to produce these videos. If you'd like to become a patron, support the channel, there'll be a link in the description. So until next time guys, remember, Nagash is all, and all is one in Nagash.